Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining this session. This session is going to talk about inclusive approaches for sustainable landscape. My name is Gita Syahrani, and I'm joining in from Jakarta, Indonesia. I am the Secretariat Head for Sustainable Districts Association, or Lingkar Temu Kabupaten Lestari. We're an association of districts government in Indonesia that are working based on collective impact theory for sustainable development pathway. And we are also looking at approaches such as jurisdictional approach and landscape approach as a way to convene people and make sure that the government becomes the facilitator, regulator, and enabler for change. What type of change are we focusing on? And this is very relevant to the session that we're going to embark right now. We will have two speakers representing each sort of territory. We will have Glenn Davis representing WWF that's going to share his experience in supporting Sabah in Malaysia, and we're going to also have Ruben Black here representing PepsiCo that's going to share their experience in supporting Aceh Tamiang and other jurisdictions in their journey towards sustainability. Now, what is jurisdictional approach and why is it relevant to be considered as an approach to support sustainability? We believe that the jurisdictional approach is a way to bring the government back in to the leadership and make sure that they're facilitating collaboration among stakeholders, including civil society, indigenous community, local community, but also private sector, academicians, and other strategic stakeholders in order to push for change. Now, how is it relevant to the current practice of certification or other verification means? We believe that jurisdictional approach also need a benchmarking exercise to define what is success and what is failure, and how do you report, monitor, and actually be transparent in terms of process and also in terms of targets that are being achieved. Now, to talk us through about the process and how does that relate to the reality on the ground, including how does this relate to the pandemic, we will start by sharing the floor first to Ruben. Ruben, the floor is yours. If you can share the presentation and maybe tell us a little bit about you and PepsiCo in the beginning, go ahead. You have 8 minutes and I'll give you a cue when there's 2 minutes left.
All right, thanks, Gita. Yeah, my name is Ruben Blackie. I'm working for PepsiCo on sustainable agriculture in Indonesia. Are you seeing the slides now?
Yeah, it's loaded now.
Fantastic. Great. Yeah, so I'll just talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in Aceh Tamiang in the VSA or Verified Sourcing Area. I'm based in Jakarta. I've been working on palm oil for a number of issues, and palm oil sustainability is one of the topics that I cover in PepsiCo. So just before I begin, I'll just give a very brief background for PepsiCo. For those that don't know, we are a manufacturer of drinks and snacks. You might not know the name, but you might know some of the brands. Pepsi Cola is probably the most famous one, but in Europe and US, we also have Lay's, Doritos, Cheetos. In Indonesia, we have Citato that you can see here on the slide. And we use a lot of palm oil. We're one of the biggest buyers in the world. We use it mostly for frying the snacks. And as a result, because we have a big commitment, we have a big volume. We have obviously corresponding commitments. So we've got NDP commitments right across our supply chain, including I've called out a couple here on the slide. 100% physical RSPO by 2020. We're on track to achieve that. Commitment to support smallholders, which is part of the reason why I'll talk about today the work that we're doing, and likewise no deforestation since 2015. So I'll talk a bit about them later on, but that's just a little background to the company. The area I would like to talk about is Aceh Tamiang. That's a kabupaten or a district in the province of Aceh. That's on the island of Sumatra in the far west of Indonesia. Some of the participants might have heard of the Lusa ecosystem. That is mostly occurring in Aceh Tamiang, and that's been a high-profile area of quite some deforestation for the last 4 to 5 years. And so it's an important area for things that live there, like orangutans and elephants and tigers. And as a result, there's been a lot of campaigns related to protecting that system. Now, palm oil is an issue there, but it's not the only forest frontier crop that's there. There's also rubber in Aceh Tamiang. Right across the province, there's also cocoa. There's also coffee and a couple of others. And what's interesting about this particular case is that it's the whole province is really dominated by SMEs, small and medium-sized companies. So it's plantation companies that maybe only have one plantation or a couple of plantations, and likewise mill companies, which is quite different from the situation that we see in a lot of other provinces, where you have much of the large integrated companies also heavily present. And as a result, the type of approach that we take for engagement is quite different, and I'll come to that a bit later on. Areas also characterized by low productivity, not only in the smallholder piece, but also amongst some of the plantations. Not much technical support to smallholders of palm. As usual, you see a lot of technical support diversified towards or diverted towards rice and some of the more strategic crops from the Indonesian government perspective. And so these issues that we see here on the ground, they're really quite systemic, the deforestation and the lack of capability and lack of technical support. So they really do need a government support as well as support from other actors. And that's what we'll talk about. So what is the VSA, the Verified Sourcing Area? This was something that was created by IDH. I don't want to go really into the detail of how it all works. That's available on IDH website, but essentially it's a kind of area-based sustainability assurance system. And it covers at least some of the key impact concerns. So the ones that I've put here, deforestation, labor, land tenure, at least it covers them. And then depending on the location, there'll also be additional ones that are depending on the local context. What we really liked as a company, and part of the reason why we agreed to participate in this, was that the targets and the actions are really set by the local stakeholders, and it's much more of a kind of bottom-up approach, I guess, than some of the other sustainability assurance schemes. And it's because of that, it's focused on local priorities, and as a result, you get a good degree of local ownership. And you can see the targets that the local group, including the government, has set there on the slide. Some quite strong targets, I think, related to increasing productivity, reducing deforestation, increasing reforestation, and such like. And so having these numerical targets was something that I was quite keen on as a representative of PepsiCo. It seemed like a strong way to move forward. And so those were set at the end of 2019 through meeting and engagement with the government and local stakeholders, such as local private sector and local CSOs. In terms of progress, obviously, like I just said, we only just started in 2019 with that agreement. So there's been some preparation progress before that. But like everything else, this work has been affected by the coronavirus. So it's been very difficult for people that are not already based in the area to travel into the area, which has affected some of the work that we would have liked to have done in the first half of this year. Nevertheless, there has been some progress. So done some good progress on traceability mapping. So get right down to the field, understand where smallholders are sitting and the level of legality they have. And that's an important component in working out some of the deforestation pieces, but also the land legality and the conflict pieces, which you saw on the slide earlier. Really great progress on formalizing governance body, and I think Gita, you'll be working on this as well. I think this is one of the most innovative pieces. There's a concept to formalize a landscape governance board, as it is basically led by the government, but with input from private sector and other actors to guide decisions around the landscape planning process, to manage infractions or concerns and respond to alerts and such like. That's supported by a monitoring system, which is being developed by WRI. And what's nice about that is it's not just about the monitoring system itself, but also about how you manage alerts when they come. So the governance body then takes on a role of deciding, okay, this alert was detected in national forest, therefore it's the government responsibility to go and check it out, or this was in a plantation, therefore it's a private sector department that should go and investigate and such like. And
Ruben,
so that's
your 2 minute
yes.
warning, okay?
Thank you. So that's, I think, very, very positive. And then we're now in discussions with IDH and the other partners to work on HGV and HGS landscape level review. So very briefly, our role, we are committed buyer. We don't buy directly from landscapers. We're a manufacturer, so we're further downstream, but we still do have contact there. So we are eventually one of the buyers of oil that comes out of this landscape. We've contributed to program design and oversights, some funding support, and we give input via the advisory board. And you can see I put here this draft structure, which is exactly what I was talking about a moment ago regarding the governance. This is still in draft, but the point is that we basically are able to give input to what we think is about what we think is important, but it remains a democratically elected and democratically accountable body. So we don't have any formal power there, and we can't take any decisions, which I think is quite useful. So just in my final minute, let me conclude that for us, I think it was this was a really attractive thing to get involved in, because we've got those hard numerical targets which have been set by the government, and they include both the production and the protection element. There's been a really good governance proposal, and that's supported by the monitoring, as I've said. Really good leadership from the local government, but good to see that the private sector were also involved, local private sector, so local mills and plantation companies. Great involvement from peers and suppliers. Unilever is here, Musimas is here. There's a number of different organizations working in here, and it's supposed to be a multi-stakeholder thing. It's not a PepsiCo project, and we are just one of the actors inside that, and that obviously makes it more attractive. And it's great impact potential. Like I said, it's a high-risk deforestation area. There's a rather impoverished area, and so the impact potential for working on this is really strong. I put the next steps here. We can talk about that at the end of the session, but I think I'll close there. I think I'm just about on time. So thanks, Geeta.
Great. You have 15 seconds left, so that was perfect. Thank you, Ruben. And just to remind everyone, we have around almost 60 people joining in. If you have any questions to the speakers, then feel free to use the Q&A box on the left-hand side, and then we will monitor and we will try to discuss your question during the Q&A session. Now, we are also excited about what Ruben was saying in terms of Aceh Tamiang and how it's progressing. Some of the key lessons learned from Aceh Tamiang already is how the targets are actually being set through inclusive approach. And I wonder whether this is something that is also resonating with the experience in Sabah. So now we will give the floor to Glenn. Same rule, 8 minutes, and I'll give you a warning in 2 minutes. Go ahead, Glenn.
Okay.
We can already see your slide.
Thank you. Thank you, Geeta, and impressive presentation. Thank you, Ruben. You set a high bar for me. So to just build on the image and the picture of jurisdictional certification, you, by the use of the term jurisdictional, are implying the law and therefore government. And I think this is a fundamental difference to RSPO, which is an international certification we're all used to, which is voluntary and which is largely business to business. So we're really broadening the idea of certification here, just as a top line concept. So where is Sabah? So I don't know if you can see my pointer or not. Anyway, Sabah on the right-hand side of the screen is green, top of Borneo, which is where I am now sitting. I am a senior advisor for WWF Malaysia, based in Sabah. And just looking at the export, roughly China gets about 1 million tons from Sabah a year. India gets about 1 million tons a year. And Europe gets about 1 million tons a year. And Sabah has accounted for about 25% of Malaysia's palm oil production. So Asia is a big market, and of course that reflects global consumption as well. And one of the questions that the Malaysian government has been looking at is, so how does Malaysia, including Sabah, maintain its market attractiveness in a very competitive edible oils market? And one of the conclusions of the Malaysian government and the economists, not the environmentalists, is that sustainability will be a key part of future sales, future market access. So you can see that's kind of the big map of where Sabah is and where its exports go. So looking at that, I hope you can see all of this. What are the government policies then to underpin a sustainable production? And there are two levels, because Malaysia is a federal state. So at the Malaysian level, there is a commitment to 50% of Malaysia will be forested. And Sabah has gone one step further on the left-hand side of this of the presentation there, they have committed to 30% totally protected within Sabah on the terrestrial land. So the land is about 7.3 million hectares. Palm oil accounts for 1.56 million hectares, about 20% of Sabah already. So that's one policy target, an important sort of statement about protection. On the other side, the Malaysian government 18 months ago required all palm growers to be MSPO certified. So that's supposed to be 100% Malaysian sustainable palm oil certified in an effort to show the sustainable production by Malaysia for the world market. Sabah has gone one step further, since the state has authority over land, and has said it wants to get RSPO certification 100% by 2025. So that's 5 years' time, very ambitious. But it sets a jurisdictional framework of policy of combining protection and production and trying to make the production sustainable. At the minute, Sabah is about 26% RSPO certified. And they are mostly big growers with mills. And they're in the eastern lowlands. So the green on your map there, green and blue and yellow, are kind of the protected areas. That 50% of forest, and the dark green and the blue and orange are the 30%. But the white, especially on the eastern side, is the lowlands, and that is where the oil palm production is. So 26% of that is RSPO already. Sabah is unusual and quite different from what you've heard in Aceh and elsewhere in Indonesia. Only 15% of the production area is smallholders, 15%, which means roughly half of Sabah's production is medium-sized growers. So the interventions to try and get to 100% RSPO really need to bring on board these medium-sized growers who are small businesses. Medium-sized would mean over 50 hectares and generally without a mill. So that's the context for what we need to do to achieve 100% RSPO for the whole jurisdiction. Then looking at the institutional arrangement, so the Sabah state government has established a Sabah Jurisdictional Certification Steering Committee. Sorry, it's a lot of words. JCSC is the acronym, which I know we all love. And on the right-hand side, you can see there are sort of 5 government agencies, 5 industry representatives, and social and environmental NGOs 5. So the steering committee is charged with achieving the 100% RSPO by 2025. And the multi-stakeholder instrument is the JCSC. That was established about 3.5, nearly 4 years ago, and has a number of working groups looking at HCV, HCS for the whole of Sabah, looking at FPIC, free prior informed consent, what would be the standards that would be required across the whole state. And it does depend on government leadership and government support. And the reason for that is because if you are going to balance protection and production, it is spatial planning that is key. And government has the authority over land allocations, including land titles and so on and so forth, which Ruben touched on just now. So that's the institutional setup.
Glenn, this is your 2 minutes warning.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you. I'm just trying to get to the next slide, but it's going whir. So we're trying to get a balance now of protection and production. And I've shown MSPO there, which is very important because even though, for example, WWF would support the international standard of RSPO, MSPO, the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil, is a key step towards RSPO. And given that it's now a regulation, it's essential that we support that as a step towards RSPO. And indeed, many of the middle-sized growers I've talked to are very keen to talk about RSPO now when they weren't before the MSPO regulation was brought in. So stepwise progress is a key part of trying to achieve this large-scale transformational change. And we know it's ambitious. Finally, we've got restoration because there are a lot of degraded areas, there's a lot of fragmentation, and we have to consider watersheds, wildlife populations, which are all operating in areas larger than just the production units. And finally, if I can get there, here's an example of one of the landscapes. So WWF's contribution to the JCSE is a landscape approach where basically we've scaled it down to landscapes. The red perimeter is 2 districts, and districts have authority over their spatial planning. The green and orange and red are already class 1 protected areas, and you will see they're entirely surrounded by white and gray. That is entirely palm oil. And so trying to get more RSPO within that landscape is our objective, while not losing the existing forest. And there's a little white arrow, and that is a wildlife corridor, which has been set aside by a company, Sabah Softwoods, because as you can see, the island of protection is separated from the bulk of the forests, entirely encircled by palm, and the wildlife corridor there is to restore the habitat so that you can reconnect those populations. So I will stop there. I hope just about on time. It gives you a sense of what's happening in Sabah and WWF's contribution to the bigger process. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. And I think the highlighted points was super relevant for the discussion in terms of how do we bring in policy as part of the long-term caveat for this successful implementation of sustainable commodities, and how you highlight basically spatial plan is something that is in the authority of the government, and only they can sort of decide what to do with their land. However, the decision-making process needs to be inclusive, and hence the governance structure is also something that is similar with what Ruben presented in Aceh Tamiang. Now that we can go to the Q&A session, before we go there, and actually it's related to the actual question in the queue, I'd like to go to Ruben first. How does the presentation relate directly to your day-to-day operation, and how does that integrate to your supply chain engagement strategy to outreach maybe the smaller scale enterprises in the region? Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Geeta. It's a challenging situation for us, all of this kind of approach, because we're not buying, as I mentioned before, we're not buying directly from the landscape, right? So effectively we are buying from suppliers who are often buying from suppliers who are buying from the landscape. And so in terms of the outreach strategy, it's been a process of doing that mill mapping and understanding where the mills are and which mills are relevant in our supply chain, where they sit, and then trying to work with our suppliers to identify how we go about and do that engagement, and in sometimes even going down to the ground themselves with relevant parties, so with IDH or with the supplier or whatever, to connect with them, help them understand why it is that we are asking for it as a buyer, these particular conditions, and that we're willing to support that. And that's also, as I said before, in terms of funding support, we've also put in that to demonstrate that we are serious and we want to support the supply chain to deliver those changes.
Thanks, Ruben. I think this is also related to what Glenn presented. Basically, you mentioned how government plays a critical role in this type of approach, including to outreach to different type of suppliers, and specifically in Sabah, because we're talking about the smaller to medium size. How do you think government plays a role? Should they be enforcing? Should they use regulation to do that?
Okay, thanks. So I think, as I explained in Sabah, they've made some policy statements which have allowed business and NGOs and government departments to say, okay, that's our direction of travel. Only the MSPO regulation has been put in. If there was a future regulation where, and just to be clear, if you don't achieve MSPO within a certain time frame, then your license from the Malaysian licensing authority is withheld. But government support and leadership is critical. The challenge there is, I've just given an example of where it works well, where the MSP regulation has really helped push sustainability in Sabah. If you have a change of government, or if you have a change of policy, of course, delays result. And we've had experience of that in all the jurisdictions we talked about. And we just had recent elections in Sabah, and we're due for some more this month. So during those periods, everything rather waits hanging. And you have to then explain to the new administration, to get their political support and buy-in. So it can go either way, as with all government support, but without it, we're not going to achieve a large scale. And I see the question, which I think you touched on, about communities and so forth. So we're very clear at the JCSE level that on HCV, for example, you can do 1, 2, and 3, the sort of ecological habitat. But on the 5 and 6, on the community, you have to go down and you have to talk to people at the local level. So bringing the lessons through the representatives on the JCSC, some of which are social NGOs, but also companies which also have issues. So how is that brought up? It's brought up from the ground, where people are trying to drive change on the ground, bringing that to inform policy at the JCSC level. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it answers the questions that Janina Grabs also up mentioned in the Q&A in terms of, sorry, not Janina, Madeline Bracer, in terms of how it's being encompasses in the governance structure. Ruben, do you want to also chime in on that in terms of the Aceh Tamiang? How do Aceh Tamiang then involve communities and also small, medium scale enterprises within the governance structure? Because it was not very visible from the presentation.
Yeah, apologies, it was a bit small. So there's a couple of ways. So you've got a steering committee which sits at the top and really guides everything. And in that steering committee, there's various government departments which sit in there, including relevant departments for communities, for agriculture, and such like industries. So you have representatives from the relevant government departments, but then below that you have an operational body which is tasked with executing the guidance of the steering committee and feeding upwards advice and such like to the steering committee. And on side that committee, you have government representatives, but you also have local private sector, and you have representatives from farmer organizations and CSOs and NGOs. Now, the actual membership of that, I don't know. I don't think it's been finalized at the moment. So that's the structure as such, but the specific organizations, I don't think it's final.
Yeah, we will soon have it, hopefully by the end of this year. Aceh Tamiang is one of our district members as well, so we've been following closely on the progress. Just on you, Ruben, another question from Janina is basically in terms of your target. How does this jurisdictional approach and your commitment to follow certain verification mechanics like the VSA affect your internal sustainability commitment, whether you're going to be moving 100% RSPO certified, or like how does that relate with your internal target?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So remember that the target for the landscape is for deforestation as a whole, right? And so what we have it's not palm related deforestation. So when we say of cutting deforestation in half in Aceh Tamiang, of course that can also mean simultaneously reducing palm related deforestation by 100%, because there's other drivers there. Similarly, not all of the suppliers in the landscape are suppliers to PepsiCo, even through the indirect supply chain that I talked about. And you have a situation where, because the companies are not integrated, it's quite rare to have integrated company. You can have a plantation company, right? That is clearing land right now and it's deforesting and not selling to anyone. And so you can see how that situation can occur, where you can, as a buyer, still have 100% deforestation free, while there's still problems happening on the ground there. And that's the whole point of these kind of approaches, is they don't allow for that kind of situation. We're trying to overcome that. With regard to the RSPO, we are on track for mass balance. Of course, mass balance allows an uncertified portion, and so as part of our work to address the potential risks in the uncertified portion, we are looking at how we can address those uncertified suppliers, and that includes the kind of characters that you're going to find in Aceh Tamiang.
Thank you. That was super clear. Now going to Glenn, there's a question, and I'll go back to Ruben slightly after, conscious of time as well. There's a question from Juan Espinosa in terms of the cutoff date for Sabah jurisdictional approach, specifically on deforestation. Maybe you can speak to that.
No, I certainly can. So obviously, I think by any standards, the 50% forest and 30% totally protected area is high targets, and they're already 26% of Sabah is totally protected. But to answer the question specifically, Sabah developed its palm in a more industrial way, as reflected by only 15% of the production area being smallholders. So 85% is small businesses or big businesses. And that was mostly done in the 80s. So it's well before the cutoff date. I think some of these, and most of the suitable land has gone. So any new clearance for palm now is on less suitable land. And the state government basically thinks this is not a good way forwards. But of course, the economic model is stuck in everyone's mind that palm's the best way to get some money. So there's a whole lot of things that need to happen. But in terms of cutoff date, the bulk has, there was a lot of deforestation in the 80s and 90s. But it was before the RSPO cutoff date. Doesn't mean that a great deal of destruction didn't happen. A lot of destruction happened before the cutoff date. So it's not such a problem in Sabah.
Okay. Related to that, just a quick question. In terms of the data and the information and the studies that Sabah is using, for example, the HCV and HES area, was that done? Who did it? Like, did the government produce it, or was that done inclusive?
Well, it was done jointly with the government and the universities here. Sabah has a great deal of ecological information dating back 40 years or so, and it's quite kind of discrete unit to assess. So the preliminary HCV assessment is there. There's also a recent publication indicating where the extra 4% could be to achieve 30% TPA. So government, Sabah Forest Department, Research Institute was commissioned to produce that report with the universities. I've lost you.
Oops, sorry. Now can you hear me? So also academic perspective, but inclusive with other stakeholders. So that's very promising. We have time for one last question, and this is for both of you. Do you think, and it's from Gemma Tilek, and is there any proof or any evidence or any learning that actually jurisdictional approach can advance legal recognition for customary rights holders? And maybe we'll start with Ruben, because I know in Aceh Tamiang there's a lot of smallholders and also indigenous community presence in the area.
Yeah, thanks, Geeta. It's always a challenging area. I think the important component is to make sure that you have the proper consultation and make sure that's meaningful. I think we see a lot of consultations which are, let's consult a couple of organizations that we think are representative, and not really getting down to the village level and or even beyond the village level if we're talking about people who are not settled in a particular spot. So I think it's primarily about having a proper, good FPIC process, but also about recognizing that those people also need to have a voice at the table inside the approach. But it's not. I wouldn't say that we've got it all figured out or anything in Aceh Tamiang, and that's still something that we're looking to try to get a handle on.
Do you think the governance structure would also provide that entry point, though?
It could do, definitely. But I think it needs to be built in the correct way, recognizing that the way that those type of people engage may not be the same way that such people that smallholders or settled communities or such like may engage.
Thank you. So regional specificity is super important. How about in Sabah? Do you find any examples of strengthening community rights? Through J8?
I wouldn't. So I don't think through the jurisdictional steering committee as we have. I mean, there have just been a bunch of land within the forest reserves removed, degazetted, and given to communities. But I don't think that required the jurisdictional steering committee. So I think, and it's also a little bit early days. I think going down to the landscape level, then there's much more opportunity to, as I say, the HCV, the community-based sort of parts of HCV and HCS need to be done at a lower level than the JCSC I've described.
Thank you, Glenn. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, okay, perfect. You were freezing a little bit. Now, going towards the end of the session and building to your last point in terms of things that we still need to improve, I'd like to give the floor back to both of you just to give a closing remarks in terms of maybe a 1-minute statement describing what is the call to action for all of the participants. This is more than 60 people that's watching and beyond should do in terms of bringing more support to jurisdictional approach. Do you want to start, Glenn?
Okay, so I'll just change caps very quickly. So I'm on the jurisdictional working group of the RSPO. We've had 2 public consultations on a document which gives the guidelines for how to approach a jurisdictional approach or landscape approach. Please have a look at it. This is all new. We're taking risks. We need to try and mitigate those risks. But a lot of thinking is going in, and the case studies from Sabah, Surian in Kalimantan, the whole of Ecuador. I've tried to give different perspectives from different regions. So my call for action is let's build it up and see how we can do it step by step. It can't just be fixed like that at a jurisdictional scale. It's too big. Thank you.
Where can people access the document if you?
So documents on the RSPO website. The consultation is finished, but the draft is still there. We hope the final document will be out in 2 months.
Great. Looking forward to it.
On the website. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Ruben, you want to chime in on that? Your 1-minute statement.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'd second Glenn's call to action there. I think that's a great call to action. Beyond that, I think these approaches, they're supposed to be pilots for scaling, and they're not going to scale by themselves. So that needs the industry to get behind them. So I'd really call others to be involved, and that's whether that's private sector in the way that we are doing or some other manner, or experts that can help us to figure out some of the questions like the one that Gemma asked a minute ago. There's a whole lot of gaps to fill in Aceh Tamiang and elsewhere. We've already got some great partners in IDH, in Unilever, Muslim Mas, but we would love to have more in that landscape or any other landscapes that, there's a lot of landscape programs going on, as Glenn had mentioned. So I call people to get behind it and contribute. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. So hopefully this will be expanding support, and hopefully this will become one of the method of actually really implementing sustainability targets. Now, we have 1 minute left, and I'll quickly summarize what happened. We've managed to answer 8 questions. That's impressive, guys. Thank you. And some of the key lessons and insights from this panel have included things like, how do we actually position jurisdictional approach or landscape approach as an approach that brings permanence in terms of involving policy and making policy as a strategic tools, not only to make sure that all of the changes can be implemented regardless political change. But the second one is actually, how do we strengthen governance and make sure that the process itself is inclusive enough so that everybody gets the seat on the table, and how at the end of the day, the targets and how sustainability is being perceived should be set through an inclusive process, not only to involve the bigger players, but also to make sure we include the voices of the community from the ground and make sure that they agree to things that they understand. So bringing into Ruben's last point in terms of regional specificity, echoed by Glenn, this is maybe not something that we can do right now yet, but lots of things to improve. And if more people get on board, then we have a better chance of making this successful. So thank you very much. I'd like to give a quick round of virtual applause for all of the speakers, and thank you for the organizer for putting the panel together. Very special to get voices from the ground and learning from the grounds. Hopefully this has been beneficial for you who have participated and Q&A questions as well. Till we meet again, my name is Gita Syahrani from Sekretariat Lingkar Temu Kabupaten Lestari, Sustainable Districts Association. Forgive me for any mistakes, and see you next time.
Thank you, Gita.
Thank you, Gita. Great facilitation.
Good job. Good job.